The wind screamed across the mountains like a living thing, tearing to the trees and swallowing every sound except its own fury. Snow swirled in white chaos when Arlen Hayes saw the SUV lose control, one spin then another, before vanishing into a wall of blinding white. For a heartbeat, he froze. His lungs burned, his pulse roared. Another accident flashed behind his eyes, the one that had taken his wife years ago. For a moment, grief pinned him where he stood. Then instinct shattered to paralysis. He ran. Even as the storm clawed at his face and his boots sank deep into the powder, Arlen ran, because he knew what it felt like to wait for help that never came. He refused to let another soul die alone in the cold. The trail was nearly invisible now, swallowed by drifts, but he pressed forward, lungs aching, legs trembling. When he finally found the wreck, it was already half buried in snow. The SUV's frame was twisted, glass shattered, metal groaning under the wind's assault. Arlen yanked on the driver's door until it gave way with a tortured creak. Inside was a woman, slumped over the steering wheel, barely conscious, her breath trembling in the frozen air. Her skin was pale, her hair wet with melting snow, and a thin cut bled along her temple. Later, he'd learn her name, Mara Lennox, CEO of Linux Dynamics, a woman known for her ruthless precision and iron will. But right now, she wasn't CEO. She was simply human, fragile, and shivering. Arlen moved quickly, his breath forming white clouds in the cold. He checked her pulse, faint but steady, and unbuckled her seatbelt. She stirred, lips moving as if protest, but no sound came. The temperature was dropping fast, and the blizzard was worsening. He looked around. There was no way they'd make it down the mountain in this storm. He needed shelter, and fast. That's when he remembered the old logging cabin a half-mile east, abandoned years ago, tucked behind frostbitten pines. He had stayed there once with his son, Rowan, when they were hiking. If it still stood, it might save her life. With effort, he lifted Mara into his arms. She felt impossibly light, her soaked red dress clinging to her like a shadow of the powerful woman she once projected. Step by grueling step, he trudged through the storm, shielding her from the wind. After what felt like hours, the dark outline of the cabin emerged through the snow, a miracle standing against the storm's wrath. Its roof sagged, its windows fogged, but with shelter. He kicked open a frozen door and carried her inside. The air inside was bitterly cold, but at least they were out of the wind. He laid Mara gently onto a pile of old quilts in the corner and went to work. There was no fireplace, only a rusty metal stove, but with trembling hands, he managed to coax a weak flame to life. The warmth came slowly, hesitant but real. As it spread to the cabin, color began to return to her face. Mara blinked awake under the dim, flickering light. Her gaze darted around, confusion etched across her features. Where am I?" she whispered. "Safe," Arlen said softly. "You crashed. I found you on the road." She tried to sit up, but winced, the cold still deep in her bones. "You saved me?" He shrugged, modest. Anyone would have done the same. Her expression said she didn't believe that. Her eyes, once sharp and commanding, were soft now, uncertain. I don't usually need saving." "Yeah," he murmured, handing her water from his pack. "Nobody does, until they do." Her red dress, elegant and absurdly out of place in the wilderness, was soaked through. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently. Arlen searched the cabin and found an old wool blanket, rough and smelling of dust, but it was all they had. He draped it across her shoulders. "Thank you," she said faintly, pulling it close. The words sounded foreign in her mouth. Outside, the wind howled against the cabin walls, relentless. Inside, the flickering firelight painted soft gold against her face. Her guarded expression began to fade, replaced by exhaustion and something like fear. As the storm raged, Mara tried to stay composed, to pretend control. But her lips were trembling, her teeth chattering. When she looked at him again, her voice was small, stripped of pride. "Can I slip under your blanket?" The request wasn't seductive. It was desperate. Human. Arlen hesitated. The memory of his wife's final night flickered painfully in his chest, the hospital's sterile chill, her fading warmth. He had sworn to keep people safe, never cross lines blurred by emotion. But this wasn't that. This was survival. He nodded, shifting closer and opening the blanket. Mara leaned in slowly, trembling as she settled against him. Her shoulder pressed his chest. Her breath came shallow and quick. At first, the contact felt awkward, two strangers bound by circumstance. But soon, warmth began to spread, gentle and necessary. She smelled faintly of frost and expensive perfume, but beneath it was something raw and human. Fear, vulnerability, truth. Arlen held her carefully, his chin resting lightly atop her damp hair. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Only the storm spoke for them, a wild rhythm beyond the cabin walls. After a long silence, Mara's voice finally broke through, soft as snowfall. I'm not used to people being kind without wanting something in return. Arlen didn't answer immediately. He simply adjusted the blanket and said quietly, "You don't owe me anything." Her breath hitched, as though that sentence carried a weight she hadn't felt in years. Outside, the world remained a blur of white fury, but inside, something warmer began to form. Not romance, not even comfort exactly, but connection. Two people thawing beside each other after too many years of cold. Mara's breathing steadied as the storm outside began to lose its voice. The violent howl softened into a whisper, and through the frosted window, faint light seeped in, touching the wooden walls with pale gold. Arlen added another log to the small stove, its warmth struggling but determined. He turned to check on her. Her face looked softer now, color returning beneath the bruises and frost. She was no longer the image of the unshakable CEO people read about in magazines. She was just a woman, cold, fragile, and profoundly human. When her eyes opened again, she found his gaze, and something wordless passed between them. Gratitude, trust, maybe even understanding. "You stayed," she murmured, her voice weak but certain. Arlen smiled faintly. "Didn't have much of a choice. You'd have frozen if I hadn't." Her lips twitched into a tired smile. "People like you always say that, but most wouldn't have stopped." He didn't reply. The truth was, she was right. Most wouldn't have. But Arlen knew what it was like to wait for someone who never came, to scream for help while the world moved on. Losing his wife in that icy car crash had carved a permanent scar into his soul, one that flared whenever he saw pain go unanswered. The silence between them grew heavy, but not uncomfortable. Mara sat up a little, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You said you had a son," she whispered, her voice gentler now. "Rowan," he said. "He's 8. Smart kid. Thinks the stars talk to each other when no one's watching." Something in her expression softened. "He sounds wonderful. He is." A flicker of sadness crossed his face. "Lost his mom when he was 5. Since then, it's just been the two of us." Mara looked down at her hands, her manicured fingers trembling slightly. "You must be strong." He shook his head. "No, just stubborn." Outside, snow still fell, though slower now, like ashes from a dying fire. The storm that had trapped them was finally surrendering. Inside the cabin, the silence began to feel almost sacred. Hours passed. The air warmed enough that Mara could move without shaking. She watched Arlen as he packed up a small emergency kit, checking his flare and compass. Every motion was careful, deliberate. A man who had learned to survive, not just live. Finally, he turned to her. "When the wind dies down, we'll try to get help. There's a ridge about a mile east. If the weather's cleared, someone might see a flare." Mara nodded, her eyes flicking toward the small window. "You really came prepared." He chuckled softly. "Mountain life. You learn to expect the worst." When he stepped outside to test the air, the silence was so vast it felt like the mountains were holding their breath. Then he fired the flare. A streak of red tore through the sky, a single, bright signal against the gray world. Back inside, Mara watched him return, his beard dusted with snow, his eyes reflecting that same streak of red. "You really think they'll see it?" she asked. "I have to," he said simply. Within an hour, the faint thrum of helicopter blades reached them, Relief filled the air like oxygen. When rescuers arrived, Mara insisted Arlen go with her. Even half-frozen, her voice carried authority that no storm could erase. At the medical station down in the valley, warmth and light replaced the cabin's dim glow. Doctors rushed to her side, but Mara's gaze followed Arlen every time he moved, as though afraid he'd vanish the moment she blinked. When she was finally stable, she asked for him. "Tell him to stay," she said to the nurse. "Please." Later that evening, when he entered her room, she was sitting upright, a blanket around her shoulders. She looked cleaner now, stronger, but her eyes were softer, filled with quiet emotion. "You didn't have to come," he said. "Yes, I did." She met his gaze. "You saved my life, Arlen. But more than that, you reminded me something I'd forgotten. That people still care. That kindness doesn't need an audience." He tried to brush it off with a small shrug, but her words caught him off guard. No one had spoken to him like that in years. The next morning, when the storm had fully cleared, Mara appeared outside the small cabin where Arlen and Rowan stayed. Her sleek black SUV was gone, replaced by a rented truck. She looked out of place among the snow and pines, yet somehow right there where she needed to be. Rowan peeked from behind the door when Arlen opened it, curious about the stranger in the expensive coat. Mara smiled, kneeling to his level. "You must be Rowan," she said softly. He nodded shyly. "Dad says you were stuck in the snow." She laughed lightly. "Your dad saved me. He's a hero." Rowan's eyes brightened. "He is." Arlen's chest tightened at the exchange. Something unspoken passed again, this time between all three of them. As they stood together under the soft morning sun, Mara turned to him. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted, "but I'd like to find out. Maybe over coffee, without a snowstorm trying to kill us." He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "I think that could be arranged." There was no grand ending, no romantic decoration, no cinematic goodbye. Just two people who had met in the harshest of storms, one carrying grief, the other burdened by power, and found something neither expected: connection. Sometimes that's how the world heals, not in miracles or wealth, but in quiet moments between strangers who decide to care. And as Mara drove away that afternoon, she glanced once more at the mountains, the same ones that had nearly claimed her life. They looked different now, not cruel, but calm, as if the world itself had softened. Arlen watched the trail of her car fade into the horizon, a faint smile on his lips. Maybe she'd come back. Maybe she wouldn't. But in that cabin, during that storm, they had already given each other the one thing both had forgotten: hope. If this story touched your heart, please share, and subscribe for Forever Tales. Speech balloon comment below. Would you help a stranger in a storm? Your voice helps kindness reach further than any flare could.